And now on your screen is Representative Jim Himes, a Democrat of Connecticut. He is currently in his second term of Congress, and he's a member of the Financial Services Committee. Congressman, welcome back to the Washington Journal table. Wanted to ask you something we've been talking about all morning, and this is sequestration. I'm going to ask you the same question I asked Representative Forbes, and you can change my verb here if you want, but do you read the sequestration process that you supported?
Not for 1 second. And we got to be careful how we talk about this stuff. Sequestration is a terrible thing. You know, I mean, these cuts, I was sitting with Jim Jones, the former National Security Advisor, at lunch yesterday. These cuts are profoundly damaging, and they're not smart. They are across the boards. They will hit good programs and bad programs alike. But as a process, you now have these hammers hanging over the Congress of the United States, which has shown itself incapable of acting on tough issues unless those hammers exist. And so, yes, I'm glad those hammers exist, and I'm hopeful that those hammers will cause us to do the big deal. And we know what that deal is. But without those hammers, look, I've only been here 3.5 years, but it's hard for me to imagine that Congress gets what it needs to get done without them there.
Do you think sequestration will happen?
I don't. Look, you've talked to a lot of members of Congress, and they all have their own things that they hate about sequestration. Randy Forbes, who you just talked to, was very focused on defense cuts, which are terrible. You know, Medicare doctors will see a 2% reduction in the amount of money they are reimbursed. They're already having a hard time making money. All of the Bush tax cuts expire on everybody. There's not a member of Congress who doesn't hate some combination of those things. Now, the reason that's a good thing is because this brings all your members of Congress together to do what we all know needs to be done, which is Simpson-Bowles, negotiated, you know, plus or minus, and get the big deal done.
So do you support the president's call and the Democrats' call, I guess, for higher taxes on $250K and over?
Well, I certainly support the principle which is embedded in Simpson-Bowles. Remember, I was one of the 38 members of Congress of both parties to vote for the Simpson-Bowles budget on the floor. It was the only budget that drew support from the Republican and the Democratic Party. Simpson-Bowles approaches taxes the right way, the way that all the economists tell us we should do tax reform, meaning keep rates as low as possible and get rid of as much of the gunk in the code, the deductions, the credits. You're talking about the credits to oil companies and private jets. It's also, by the way, some stuff that is going to, you know, be a little painful for people. Do it that way. So picking an arbitrary, look, am I smart enough to know if the answer is 250 or 300 or 750 or a million, as Leader Pelosi was saying originally? To some degree, that's a fool's errand, because that's not the way to fix the tax code. Now, I do subscribe to the notion that in a world where we're going to ask the Pentagon to make tough cuts, where across the boards we're going to make tough cuts, that yes, the very wealthiest people in this country, many of whom, by the way, I represent in Connecticut, they too are going to be at the table helping us solve this very difficult deficit problem.
From the National Journal this morning, House conservatives are considering accepting a deal with Democrats on a $1 trillion 6-month stopgap spending bill to keep the federal government running after the October 1st start of the new fiscal year and possibly into a new Congress. Would you support this?
Under one condition. The preferred solution here, of course, is for us to come together right now and pass something that looks like Simpson-Bowles. You know, behind closed doors, most members of Congress will tell you that's what we need to do. When the cameras are on, the answer may be different. That's the preferred solution. Realistically, I don't know that's going to happen. So all the stuff that is in Simpson-Bowles, a reform of the tax code, an equitable and fair reform of the Medicare system, that stuff does not get done in a lame duck period. So yes, there probably does need to be a period of time in which the committees do their work. However, I support it under the condition that those hammers stay there, meaning if the deal isn't done in that 6-month period, all hell breaks loose. That's what's going to force us to get that deal done. So yes, an extension in principle makes sense, provided it's not us just saying, gosh, I hate all this stuff, so let's just put it off into the future, so long as it's got real hard stops.
Okay, so if the CR passes, does the sequestration process still begin if that's all the Congress does?
Well, we could pass a continuing resolution which would postpone the effects of the sequestration, meaning the tax cuts going away, the defense cuts and everything. Let's just say instead of starting on December 31st, they start on, if it's 6 months, I guess it would be June 1st. Again, in principle, that's not a terrible idea, so long as those hammers remain there. The outcome that is a catastrophe for this country is, frankly, if Congress weasels out from these hammers that they've put there. If they just say, gosh, these defense cuts, we just can't sustain them. These tax cuts going away, it'll be devastating. Well, let's just get rid of them all. Now we're a year down the road. We've got no hammers to cause us to do the deal, and what happens? The markets at some point, and by the way, the rest of the world just says the United States can't govern itself. It can't take the hard decisions to get its budget under control. So then all of a sudden we're doing it because we have to do it. And we don't have the money to do the things that we really want to do. You know, invest in our infrastructure in this country, build our railways and our roadways, invest in the education of our kids. That's got to be the destination.
19 legislative days between now and adjournment in early October for the 112th Congress. What do you think is going to get done in those 19 legislative days, and what do you think the lame duck is going to look like?
Well, again, in a perfect world, we would start the process of moving towards a Simpson-Bowles-like deal. And the reason I keep saying a Simpson-Bowles-like deal is that I voted for it, but look, it's not perfect, and it'll need to be negotiated by 535 people. That would be the perfect solution. Now, I don't have any reason to believe that this Congress is going to get there. This Congress is remarkably unproductive. It's remarkably partisan. So what's going to get done? You know, we are going to need to deal with the fact that we've got an expiring budget process. But beyond that, Peter, and I'll tell you what, it breaks my heart to say this, but in a world where we've got millions of people unemployed, where we need to be investing in our bridges and our highways, where we should focus on our schools, where we should lead on energy, the reality is, look where we've been in the last couple of weeks. The political class has been talking about how long Mitt Romney worked at Bain Capital and whether the president really thinks that people who start businesses didn't get any help. I mean, I understand why that discussion occurs, but what a sad thing for the Republic.
Jim Himes is a Democrat of Connecticut. He is a graduate of Harvard and a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford. He worked at Goldman Sachs for 12 years, began at entry level, worked his way up to vice president. He is currently in his second term. Bridgeport and Stamford are some of the cities that he represents in Connecticut. Numbers have been up on the screen if you'd like to dial in and join our conversation with him. Front page of the Financial Times this morning. I want to get your reaction to this as a former banker and a member of the Financial Services Committee. Sandy Weil of Citibank, break up the big banks. What do you think?
It's a remarkable statement. I mean, no individual is probably more closely associated with the idea of creating these behemoths than the guy who created Citibank or Citigroup, you know. So it was really remarkable. And this, of course, has been a debate that we've had for a long time. Some very smart people, Paul Volcker, you know, who aren't in the partisan fray, have made that argument. Bring back Glass-Steagall. This sort of started going wrong when Glass-Steagall was eliminated. It's not the approach we took. But you know what? We ought to continue to have that debate. It is still clear that while Dodd-Frank did some very smart things, regulating derivatives, you know, putting more controls over who gets to buy what mortgage and, you know, protecting consumers, that we have more to do in thinking about these institutions that if they fail, they risk bringing down the economy. So I'm not at a point personally where I'm where Sandy Weil is, saying break them up, for a bunch of reasons. I'm not sure exactly how we would do that. It worries me that if we did that unilaterally, now we've got smaller banks competing with German and British and Chinese banks that are, you know, that have scale that our guys don't. But it's not something we should just say absolutely no to. It's a debate we should continue to have here.
And finally, Congressman, House panel questions Geithner yesterday on his handle Barclays rate rigging. Timothy Geithner, this is the New York Times, was questioned sharply on Wednesday about the rate rigging scandal that has consumed the banking industry as lawmakers at a House hearing asked why he had failed to thwart wrongdoing during the financial crisis.
Well, you know, now that LIBOR has become a focus, you know, I think Ben Bernanke said it best. It's clear that the way that rate is set has profound structural problems, was I think the way he used it. And think about what was going on there. You know, a bunch of banks were putting forward estimates of what they thought, in theory, they might be able to borrow at. Come on. I mean, the incentive there to game that system is just so clear. So should the Fed have done more? Probably. I don't know. You know, Geithner raised his hand. He talked to the British authorities, and it just, remember, this is 2008, right? When people's hair is on fire because J.P. Morgan Chase or Citibank or Goldman Sachs or Lehman or Bear may go under. So hard to put yourself back in the shoes of 2008. But yeah, this should have been much more of a focus.
First call out for Congressman Himes comes from Louisville, Kentucky. John, on our Democrats line, you're on C-SPAN.
Good morning. Before the congressman that was on, before you were on, Congressman Hines Forbes, there was a gentleman called in the Republican line. He was saying how much he liked Ron Paul. Now, I'm a Democrat, but I like Ron Paul, too. And if you'll notice, he's the guy that's always telling us, let's not get in these wars unless we absolutely have to. So many of these darn neocons that never served a day in the military are so anxious to always get us in war. That'd be a good way of saving money. I think everybody knows we're going to have to cut on both sides of the aisle. One thing that concerns me is our Senator McConnell. I hate to say it, I think Obama will, I'm glad Obama's going to, I think, will be reelected, but I think the Senate's probably going to go Republican. Now, McConnell, here in Kentucky, the Tea Party has all of the energy right now. McConnell is scared to death that he's going to have a opponent either in the Republican primary in 2 years, or there's two or three Democrats that want to run. But the point I'm trying to make is I don't think people are going to compromise and budge as much as people think they're going to next year. And I just, the Republicans argue, well, if you cut the military, it's going to cost jobs. But on the other side, they said, no, we got to cut the heck out of all these other programs, but they don't talk about how that's going to cut jobs. But what you were saying earlier, I kind of like the Simpson-Bowles approach, but people are going to have to compromise, but I just don't see it coming. I wish I was more optimistic, but I'm not. Thanks a lot.
Yeah, John. Looking at the last couple of years, you'd be justified in being more cynical maybe than I am. And look, you said some things that are very important. Ron Paul has been a critic of our involvement abroad, the Iraq War and the Afghanistan war. And yeah, I think most Americans, if you asked them, would tell you that we should never have gone into Iraq, that that's not where our fight was. And Afghanistan was a different situation, obviously. That's where the people were who hurt us on 9/11. But, we got into this nation-building mission there, which in the end I certainly don't think was ever going to be successful. But you also said, look, everybody needs to be at the table giving a little bit, and that is how we get this done. Now, you're right. You're also right, by the way, about the minority leader in the Senate. And I look at where the Republican Party is today, where a guy like Bob Bennett of Utah, who's as conservative as the day is long, gets taken out because he's not conservative enough. Dick Lugar, real conservative, taken out. The list goes on. And so, yeah, a guy like Mitch McConnell is probably looking over his shoulder, and that makes it a little harder for him to come to the table. However, again, we were talking about those hammers that are hanging over our head right now. You ask Mitch McConnell what he thinks about taxes rising on every income taxpayer in this country, or the very brutal cuts hitting defense automatically. I bet you he chooses to be compromising rather than to let those things happen automatically.
Round Rock, Texas. Amin, on our Republican line, you're on with Congressman Jim Himes.
Good morning, Congressman.
Good morning.
Like your last caller, I am really ashamed of the Republican Party and this Tea Party that's infiltrated the real Republicans. When you come to the table saying that no matter what your opposition says, you're going to be against it because you're more concerned about winning the next election instead of helping people, I can't be nothing but ashamed of you. I think the cuts need to go through, both of them. Not only these cuts, but the cuts as far as the taxes go. Because until we do something that drastic, I don't think the American people are going to stand up. I mean, it's divided now. We need a lot of stuff done, and we can't get it done. I'm a Vietnam vet, and when I served in Vietnam, we had no outsiders there. It was strictly military. Why do we need so many of these people that's over in Afghanistan right now that's making $160,000 a year when a military private is only making about $12,000 a year? That's waste. The military should fight our wars, and private contractors should get out of it.
Okay, we're going to leave it there, Amin. Congressman Himes?
Yeah, Amin raises a bunch of points, and one of them was really important. Again, getting back to this notion that everybody, everything, every department, every agency needs to come to the table. Now, by the way, Simpson-Bowles, one of the principles underlying Simpson-Bowles was that the very poorest in our country and the programs that they rely on for food, for housing, they shouldn't be asked to sacrifice and to go over the edge. That was Simpson-Bowles. That wasn't necessarily a Democratic idea, but when we talk about defense, as Amin was doing, I had the good fortune to sit next to Jim Jones, former commandant of the Marine Corps, four-star Marine general, at lunch yesterday, and he started talking about the waste in the military. There aren't a lot of people who care as much about the integrity and the capability of the military as Jim Jones does. But he said the procurement process in the Pentagon should make us embarrassed. And he told stories about, 20 years to build a fighter plane, billions of dollars of cost overrides. He gave an example, we got all hot and bothered about the GSA and the ridiculous conferences with all that stuff. They wasted whatever it was, $200, $300, $800,000, whatever it was. Jim Jones says, guess what? The Pentagon has walked away from $50 billion of procurement programs. Just said, sorry, we spent this money, we've got nothing to show for it. And not a single person in DOD was held accountable for that. The point I'm trying to make is that the American people should never think that we are talking about every dollar coming out of the Pentagon meaning we are less safe. Like every other government agency, in fact, more than most government agencies, because it's the one government agency that can audit itself, we could do a lot more to make an efficient, on-point Department of Defense. And so that's a key part of this process. The other thing is, of course, look, an awful lot of the Department of Defense is still, and they've done wonderful work to recreate themselves, but is still, there to fight the Soviets. Thousands and thousands of nuclear warheads that were built to fight the Soviets. Platforms that are all about defeating the Soviet Union. You look at these areas and you say, yeah, we can make defense cuts without hurting our security.
Jim tweets into you, Congressman, should the 50% or so paying no federal income tax chip in at least something?
We got to remember when we're talking about people who aren't paying income tax that they are paying taxes. They are paying sales taxes, they are paying Social Security taxes, they are paying Medicare taxes, and we're talking about people here who are at the lower end of the income stream. Now, so when you talk about the poorest, and that's obviously not 50% of the population, but when you talk about the poorest, in fact, they're paying negative income tax because we've got this program that was placed by that crazy, wild-eyed, liberal Democrat, Richard Milhouse Nixon, called the Earned Income Tax Credit, which for poor families gives them a little bit of money. By the way, it's one of the most successful poverty alleviation programs we have. I don't think you want to do away with that. It has lifted more people out of poverty than most of the programs we have. Now, when we start looking at in the middle there, then it's an open question. Yeah, let's look at that. But by the way, let's also look at the fact that the very wealthiest in this country are paying tax rates. The Senate candidate in my district, who's a very wealthy woman, released her tax returns, 15% tax rate. Whereas if you're a middle-class family, let's just put a number out there, you're making 75 grand a year, you're probably paying 20, 30% tax rate. So we've got a lot of work we can do in the tax code to make it fair.
Fairfield, Connecticut. James on our independent line. You're on with Congressman Himes. Is Fairfield one of your senators?
That's a constituent.
All right. Go ahead, James.
Good morning, Congressman Himes.
Good morning.
I've met with you once in your office, and whenever I see you out at an event, I always shake your hand. My statement is our district is really fortunate. Prior to Mr. Himes, we had Chris Shays, and now we're really fortunate to have Congressman Himes representing us. But I want to know, what are we doing for the city of Bridgeport? Some time ago you mentioned that there was the Congress Street Bridge that was in an upright position for the longest time, and I just want to know the status of that project. And also, don't forget, it was the city of Bridgeport that got you elected in the last election, and it's very important that you pay attention to this area of the county. Thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you, James. My district, for those viewers who don't know it, it's a very interesting district. I represent some of the wealthiest people in the world in places like Greenwich and New Canaan and Darien, but I've also got the city of Bridgeport, Connecticut, which is one, I think, of the top 10 poorest cities in the country with all that implies. And so, yes, it's been a real focus of mine. And you asked about the Congress Street Bridge. We're really down local now. Bridge was a real symbol of urban decay in Bridgeport. It was stuck in the upright position. We managed to get that taken down. More importantly, we're starting to see some development, and I'm glad to say I was able to play a role in this. In some of the areas of Bridgeport, this used to be a huge industrial city, and like so many of our old industrial cities, there's now brownfields and stuff. We have a development growing up in Bridgeport and what's called Steel Point, where Bass Pro, which, the fishermen watching right now, they got excited about that. Bass Pro is going to be an anchor retail outfit right there in downtown Bridgeport, and of course we'll put grocery stores around that. And what's wonderful about that is that those stores create jobs, and jobs is what Bridgeport needs. You got a lot of people working. Some of your problems around violence and other things start to go away. People start to focus more on the quality of the schools. So yeah, Bridgeport is a challenge in my district, but I think we're moving in the right direction.
And just to further that, what that caller had to say here, we've been talking about sequestration and budget cuts, et cetera, and he wants, you to look out for Bridgeport. And then Bill tweets into you, Jim, as a Connecticut resident, I want you to get more of our federal taxes back. Tired of paying for other states' bad management.
Well,
Is this a constant push and pull for members of Congress?
well, it is an interesting thing. Look, I represent a very affluent area, and there's a lot of people in that position. People in New York City, people in our wealthier cities. Because we have a progressive income tax, if you have a lot of high income earners, yeah, you're probably a net donor, if you will, to other states, poorer states and whatnot. So what most of my people say is do right by the state of Connecticut. We have huge challenges around transportation infrastructure. If you're in my district at rush hour in the morning, it's a little bit like being on the Beltway in Washington. It's a catastrophe. We need to fix that. That's a real drag on our... So most of my constituents say, hey, let's fix this stuff. Let's make sure we have good schools. And then, yeah, I understand that I'm contributing to the national pot, which defends this country, which provides Pell Grants to students to go to college who otherwise wouldn't be able to do so. Most people don't say, it's all about me. They understand that we're a country that has different needs and that wealthier areas are going to be helping out less wealthy areas.
Cheryl, Democrat, Piscataway, Maryland. You are on C-SPAN with Representative Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut.
Yes, I'd like to make a statement about taxes. I don't think that the 1% in this country should be getting any type of tax break because they're already making billions and billions and billions of dollars in profit. And meanwhile, the working class and the people, the middle class, are suffering, and all because these people are just motivated by greed. And not only, there's no way that the working class or the middle class are going to win when you have all the Republicans who have signed all these pledges and promised they weren't going to pay raise any taxes, they weren't going to do anything. So therefore, they're getting all these millions and millions and millions of dollars so that they can be reelected. They don't owe anything to the middle class. They owe nothing to the poor or the working class. So therefore, I don't see why, in God's name, anybody want to even listen to anything these people have to say. I mean, they have already been bought. They've already sold their souls for $1. And I just feel like, no, they don't. Rich people don't deserve anything. They haven't. There's no type of statistics that have proven that there's any type of trickling down of jobs based on the rich income. In fact, when President Bush left office, we were like 800,000 people losing jobs a month. And now that this current president is in there, he's got 60, 70,000 people getting jobs, and people are saying he's doing a lousy job. And I don't see why. I don't see how they can make that assumption. But no, I don't feel like the rich people do thing. I feel like they've gotten a lot, and I feel like they need to step aside and let other people, up and coming people, get a chance at success in life.
Yeah, Cheryl. I mean, I guess I'd say two things to that. One. I'd want to quibble, I guess, a little bit with the notion that the 1% is totally motivated by greed. I think sometimes too often we fall into the trap of, creating a situation where we're shaking our fists and saying, the rich are motivated by greed. Look, we want all Americans to have the opportunity to succeed and to be successful, and that also can mean making money. Now, does that mean that everybody in the 1% is honest? No, there's corruption up there just like there is everybody else and everywhere else, and so I would quibble with that statement, but your overall statement is exactly right, and this is a profound difference between where the Democrats are today and where the Republicans are. The fact of the matter is that in the last 30 years in this country, the top 1%, the top 2%, have done extraordinarily well. Their incomes have skyrocketed. The amount of the wealth of this country that they own, and I say this without any hint of vilification, and you heard what I just said, has been staggering, right? The middle class is hanging on by its fingernails. The poor are doing worse. There are more poor people in this country than ever before. So the notion that fixing that problem involves protecting that 1 or 2% from any contribution to fixing our nation's problems is, one, mathematically problematic, but two, morally wrong. We have a middle class that is barely hanging on. So the education, the jobs, all of the things that help our middle class be there, they need the support of the government. They need a thriving private sector. And we all got to come together to make sure that we restore the kind of opportunity that is there for everybody.
We have about 12 minutes left in our program. The House of Representatives comes in at 9 a.m. this morning. Creedmoor, North Carolina. Greg on our Republican line. Congressman Jim Himes is our guest.
Congressman Himes, I've been a Republican all my life, but for one time I agree with you 100%. And the previous caller, and I agree with the Obama philosophy of let's pit the one class against the other. Let's storm the banks and take the money of all the rich people and kind of divvy it out to the people we think need it the most. Damn the program that the Democrats put in place in the 1960s by Lyndon Johnson for the Great Society. We haven't progressed a whit with that. It's been a fraud, is what it's been. The only way you can make better for yourself is to work for yourself. It is to pull your bootstraps up, get up, and go to work. However, this philosophy that you share with the previous caller about pitting one class against the other and marching to the bank and storming the banks and taking the money from the rich because they're evil and irresponsible, and just give it to those who think they need it or we think need it. I think that's a brilliant idea. And another thing is, let's just draw a line, just a vertical line. And on one side, you have all these people busting their butt to pay their taxes. It's tough out here. It's hard out here. I happen to have a little bit better than others. I'm thankful for it. I thank God every day I'm in the position I'm in, but I work for it too. But,
all right, you know what, Greg? We're going to leave it there and get a response from Congressman Himes.
Yeah, Greg, I don't know if you listened carefully to what I was saying. Look, this notion that we should storm the banks and take the money away from the rich people, look, that's not the conversation this country needs to be having. The conversation this country needs to be having is, what do we need to do to make sure that every child who is born in America today has the opportunity, let me put it this way, to grow up to be rich? You know, and the answer to that question, of course, is that that's a partnership between the private sector, between businesses, small and large, and the public sector. I went to public school. That was a government program. I'm protected by the United States military, a government program. I use a BlackBerry, which uses the Internet, which was invented by DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project Agency. It's a partnership. So this argument that we have of, does prosperity come from government or the private sector, is just about as stupid as it can be. The answer is, government puts in place the foundation, the skeleton that allows kids like me to get well educated and to succeed. And it's a partnership. It's about government helping with education. It's about government making sure that nobody starves in the wealthiest country in the world and that people have opportunity.
Congressman Himes, this tweeter, C-SPAN Democrat, referring back to your position as vice president at Goldman Sachs, if Goldman Sachs would vote for Simpson-Bowles, that tells me it's bad for the 99%.
You know, I guess the logic is of this concept that corporations are people and therefore should have full First Amendment rights and be able to put tons of money in this. I guess the next step in that is that they should also get a vote, right? Isn't that logical? Anyway, I'm not quite sure what the point of that tweet was. You know, it's not Goldman Sachs. It is senators from both sides of the aisle who are on that commission voted for it. CEOs around this country are saying it's a good idea. Andy Stern, who's the former president of the Service Employees International Union, SEIU, says that he regrets voting against it. So here you've got union guys and CEOs and Republicans saying this is the deal. So I don't really care what Goldman Sachs thinks about Simpson-Bowles. You've got people across the spectrum saying this is the deal.
And Maverick tweets in, Representative, many say we need to reset and return to better policies. How do we do that?
Better policies. That's a pretty broad question. Look, we're, and this is what I do day to day, and it really bothers me. We're in an environment now where people are saying things which are political. You know, they're saying that President Obama doesn't believe in the private sector. They're saying that, you know, Mitt Romney wants to offshore America. You know what? That kind of vilification, that kind of polarization makes it that much harder for us to do what we have done in this town for 220 years, which is stand by our principles, but close the doors and make a deal. You know, when we vilify each other, when, you know, if you're a Republican, I can deal with you. If you're Satan, it's a little harder for me to deal with you. So when we let the rhetoric go to where it has gone today, it makes it hard for us to govern, because governing is about compromising.
Stanford, North Carolina. David, on our independent line, you're on with Congressman Himes. Please go ahead with your question or comment.
Yes, thanks C-SPAN for this opportunity, and Mr. Himes, I'm glad to have the opportunity to speak with you, and the biggest thing I want to say is I think all our leaders in Washington need to take America into consideration instead of themselves so much, and worrying about getting elected the next time they're up. But the main thing is you need to use good common sense in the cuts and stuff you make, like the military. Our military budget, we subsidize European nations' militaries, and their working class citizens get retirement in their 50s. And here, my Social Security wants to be cut, and want to raise my retirement age to 67, 69, whatever, and that's a slap in my face. That's all I've got to say.
Yeah. Well, this brings us back to the question of how we think about the military, and I think most Americans, and certainly a lot of my colleagues, agree that our military needs to be large enough and strong enough to guarantee the security of the American people. And of course, we are now, even though we're not quite what we were in 1960, the only superpower out there. The Chinese, the Russians, others are sort of rising. We are still the guarantors of world security, and yeah, that means we spend an awful lot of money to protect people who are 10,000 miles away from us, and that's got to change over time. Look, as China and Japan and these countries get wealthier, they need to contribute more to global security. But yeah, look, I mean, if anybody is making the argument that the Defense Department cannot sustain cuts, they need to remember two things. One, if you add in CIA and our intelligence and our wars and everything else, you get a figure of $800 billion in spending last year. That's more than every single country on the planet combined spends on defense and security. And by the way, they talk about, the Republicans in particular love to talk about growth out of control in the government. The non-defense programs in the government, the FAA, the courthouses, the EPA, they've actually on a real basis been flat over time. In the last 10 years, our spending on defense after 9/11, so I'm not saying this was the wrong decision, but after 9/11, defense spending has doubled over that period of time. So yeah, Department of Defense is going to be there at the table when we do the deal we need to do.
Suzanne tweets into you, Congressman, how about a 10% flat tax on corporations, and take the cap off of FICA to fix it, and offer Medicare as an insurance alternative?
There's a lot there. No question, we need to rethink our corporate tax structure. We have the first or second highest corporate tax rate in the world, which means that corporations have every incentive to keep the money that they make offshore. That means they're building factories and plants and whatnot outside of the United States, and those jobs are not being done right here. So yeah, we should look again at the corporate tax code and reform it to make it more competitive. She said about Medicare as an option. That's a very complicated proposition. But one thing is very clear, which is we did a health care reform. It's doing some really good things. There's an awful lot more that needs to be done. The list is one we all know. People no longer being turned away with pre-existing conditions, kids being on their parents' plans, seniors no longer paying that donut hole penalty on their drugs. But we got a long way to go in terms of making the healthcare system more efficient and less costly.
And just the third one, would you support taking the cap off of FICA for Social Security?
I think we're going to need to raise that cap, yes. I don't know if I would say there is no cap, but part of the deal that makes Social Security sustainable will involve raising that cap from whatever, today it's about $108,000, and that's as part of the deal that's going to go up.
Derek, Democrat in Billings, Montana. We have 1 minute left. Go ahead.
Good morning, Jim Hunt. This is Derek, and I have a suggestion. I recently just did my college research paper, and I found out that if we grew hemp as a country, that we would no longer have to buy foreign fuel. Apparently, if we grow 6% of the continental U.S., it would supply all of our energy needs. It would eliminate cutting down our trees and making paper, and it does not pollute when we burn. So it only makes sense that we use this as a country, and it would create lots of jobs. Our forefathers knew it was a good product, and I think we need to use it.
Great, Derek. We got the point. Congressman Himes, every once in a while we get a call about hemp. And and usually from pro-hemp people. Do you support hemp production?
But behind this question, all the good is we'd all be a lot mellower too, right? And probably eat a lot more junk food than we do today, no?
Well, I'll let you make that comment. So I want to report the jobless claims have come in, and the number of Americans applying for unemployment benefits dropped by 35,000 last week, a figure that may have been distorted by seasonal factors. The Labor Department said Thursday that applications fell to a seasonally adjusted 353,000. That's down from a revised 388,000 and the biggest drop since February 2011. How would you describe the economy of your district?
Well, like much of the rest of the country, we've seen recovery in the last 2 years. 2 years ago, remember, a lot of people in my district work in the financial services industry, and people were wondering, my God, are these big banks going to exist on Monday morning? We're past that. So we've seen significant recovery, 24 months straight of job creation, but, of course, not at the rate that we want to see it. So we've got a lot more to do.
Congressman Jim Himes, Democrat of Connecticut, has been our guest. The House of Representatives